yeah, it's going to become the modern wellness minstrel show, right? So it's going to become
modern wellness minstrel show.
Yeah.
Y'all, that might be the new name of the podcast. Oh my God, that's this might be the best moment that has ever occurred.
I'm Tamika.
And I'm Ashley.
And this is Not Tea podcast.
In this podcast, we talk about our real life experiences of being Black women navigating white wellness.
Which is just a microcosm of the world off the mat.
Is it tea if it's just storytelling?
Let's talk about it.
Every time you do that, my brain goes dun 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 dun.
Get a little rocking going.
I'm also here for this like 80s moment.
I love it.
Meanwhile, Shawn was not born at that time. He's like the baby.
Late 80s. Right. But I grew up on that. I grew up on that energy.
Bet. I mean, yeah. I hope so. That's culture right there.
Listen.
Yeah, I mean, and like how much of that culture is being, I just took a class where it was like covers, and it was like all of these songs by Black and brown people that were covered by country artists. And I was like, it's giving 1940s.
It's giving Elvis.
It's giving the role of the Beatles. It's giving Elvis especially. Oh my gosh! But isn't that a little bit about what? Okay, and not Big. Anyway, that's a little bit like what we're here to talk about, and yeah, and how that is, and how things, Blackness is showing up in studios, and how it's like a little bit magical, a little bit Morgan Freeman, a little bit folks wanting us to do, like be in this
now,
really
I was
interesting.
Ready for this conversation.
My question is, I was like, is it Morgan Freeman / magical? Morgan Freeman. I got questions. Right from the jump. As you put both of those things together.
Let's talk about it. So we're here with the incomparable Shawn J. Moore, who is joining us from hot Atlanta, Chocolate City. And I am in Houston, which, by the way, I prefer to Atlanta, sir. And I know we have like a little rivalry. And then Ashley's in LA. So we have these very different experiences. And yet, strangely, we've come to some very similar realizations. So we're going to talk about it today. So welcome, Shawn. We're so happy to have you. Shawn is an internationally renowned sound healer, yoga practitioner, and leader. He trains people to do what he does, and he has just released his first book. He's calling it a workbook. I'm calling it a book because it has to go through a printing press. You just published the book, bro. So could you tell us a little bit more about your book and why you published it and why everyone should go out and buy it right now? And welcome also.
Thank y'all for having me. It's always awkward listening to people talk about you. My bashful side is like, oh, she's talking about me. That's weird. But thank y'all for having me. It's really a pleasure to be on your platform and just to be in conversation. Because I already know, my spirit is already like, this is going to be a great conversation. So I'm like grounded and ready. And then thank you for also like keeping me honest around like the work, the book. I'm going to say book. You are not the only other person who's been like, it's a book, bro. Call it a book. But what prompted me, the book is called Sound is My Sanctuary. And, I'm always big on creating resources for folks to have, and I think it's the educator in me that wants to have something tangible for folks to take with them. I started out with creating card decks that will, folks can pull for their meditation practice or just their sadhana in general. And for me, I think I got the question just about every time I was guiding folks through sound baths or sound healing practices. I was like, I'm interested in sound, but I don't know where to get started. And so for me, it's like, okay, this question is coming up a lot. How can I create a resource? I see there's a need and there's a gap there. How do I create a resource for that? But particularly a resource that's rooted in our experience. So for me, that was really important. And so I just wanted to answer the question, how do you get started in sound? And for me, getting started in sound, I think is a very personal practice. And that's why the book has a lot of activities to really sort of help you ground specifically in your interest in sound, what's pulling you to that, what your relationship is with sound, and how to sort of nurture that relationship much more intentionally. So yeah, I wanted to have a resource to be like, hey, you want to get it and get connected with sound? Here's a workbook. Here's something for you to tap into. And I think for me, the structure as a workbook, it's I'm big on experience, right? You can read a book, you know what I mean? It's cool. But to at the end of the chapter, slow down, reflect what's coming up for you around this. Here's an activity to help you digest and integrate what you just learned. For me, that's a big piece of the spaces that I like to create. And I wanted that to be representative in the book as well.
You're speaking my language. I love a prompt.
Mm-hmm. Listen,
where
you gotta get people pause for a second, reflect. Did this land? Yeah. You got some questions? Think about it this way. And then go on to the next chapter.
Can we take some time for reflection, please?
Yes. Where can we find your book?
Yes, it is on my website, ShawnJMoore.com. You can go on there. You can find the copies of the workbook, print copies, and you can also find access to the sadhana decks as well. And also meditation practices and sound bath practices too.
Oh, it sounds just like everything therapeutic.
a lot of things, right? And even the workbook itself comes with a sort of a companion website that has some video tutorials and practices and things like that. I wanted to be, even though it's a physical book, it also needs to be an experience. And so there's a whole bunch of components to it that'll help people immerse themselves in and hopefully connect to sound in a very intentional and personal way.
Yeah. Ashley, what's your relationship with sound and sound healing, sound baths?
Oh man, I just starting before we even get into the actual practice of sound healing, music. I just grew up in a home that was very filled with music. I have diehard Prince fan parents.
Same.
And to a point that I was the one sent out to stand in line to get tickets for this family. We were all going to go see Prince, I don't know, this is decades ago now. Youngest, back when you had to stand online at Ticketmaster. And as we're going through the line, they're like, sorry, folks, we're having to limit the tickets to 4 people. And I was like, oh, shoot, I don't know which one of my siblings is going to have to fight this out because I'm clearly going because I stood in line for the ticket. Yeah. So then at some point a little later, they come out and they're like, actually, it's only going to be 2 tickets per person. And I was like, uh-oh, I guess me and mom are going. Because I'm standing in line. And then I got home and very quickly my dad was like, who paid for those tickets? We'll bring you a t-shirt.
Oh, boo.
Boo. I got to see him a decade after that I made it. But I just, all types of music. My brother is named after my dad's favorite jazz musician, music. And I think without knowing I was doing so, I'm that person that would create soundtracks for every moment of my life growing up. In high school, I'd be like, I just had a horrible breakup. I need to come home and put on this album and cry it out. Like that was the thing. I was looking for the music always really specifically to set the tone or to soothe or to, to facilitate some sort of experience or some sort of healing or breakthrough. But it wasn't until maybe about 8 years ago, I was in Peru and I had an actual sound healing session there. And someone was like putting bowls on my body. And that unlocked something really beautiful. And so I continue to seek it. And it's on my, Tamika knows this, and Shawn, you'll coming in to know, but Tamika and I both have a horrible habit of doing the most, and then it's like, but I can do the most on top of the most. So on the list of the most, it's like I would like to go in and do some practice and to do some study around this, but I'm not studied in the way that I offer sound healing, but I am an avid seeker of it.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
And just the vibratory nature of
trainings.
Language. So I've heard.
I've heard. But I think, Ashley, you mentioned something that I feel like is so powerful as people think about connecting to sound. Like you mentioned, like growing up, you created soundtracks to things that were happening in your life. And like, I think sometimes, I've had this conversation with folks who want to explore sound. It's like, cool. The things that you see with the bowls and the instruments, that's cool. But we already got a very sort of powerful connection to sound and music if we just think back to it, right? And so to your point of creating soundscapes for yourself that like help match how you're feeling or to help bring you out of a particular state, it's something we've already been doing, but it's just thinking intentionally of like, can I do this in a way that is intentional, and can I do this in a way that actually helps me move into the state that I want to go into? And so, yeah, I love that you shared that, because I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening can probably think back to that same sort of way of creating playlists or they got their favorite album or song, or they got their pick me up, artist that they listen to. It's like, yeah, you're actually cultivating a sound bath for yourself in those ways. It might not be with the singing bowls, but it's with music that really does something to touch your soul.
What's wild is I'm just realizing like how this is a shared experience with us, but like my wife does not have that same connection to music. And I only recently found that out because I too, was like I can think of seventh grade dance and like dancing to Journey and, and Chicago. And then, I can think back to my grandmother, having a big party at her house and Earth, Wind and Fire was on, like these moments, that definitely like punctuated my life. I'm a classically trained singer. And so like music is something that I thought that I was going to do professionally for a long time. And then, and I didn't, but I still see like weaving the soundtrack of life, throughout life and what it sounds like. And like right now it's very kind of like chill. Sometimes it's like dark trap, and like other times it's just like super ratchet booty music. And, what do I need for my energy today? But I remember, growing up with like, gospel and like Al Jarreau and things like that. And not really connect. There was something that was a disconnect for me there with that, but if I hear it, it still kind of wakes something up in me. But my wife is totally different. And I told her this is one of our culture differences. My wife is white, for those who don't know. And I was literally like, we went to Earth, Wind and Fire in Chicago, here in Houston. I was like, like I was having a whole moment. And she's like, I don't have those musical memories like you have, because her parents were very much like, music is to celebrate God or culture. And that meant either country music or old school, like I call it white gospel. or like, and then the only like acceptable non-version of that was Motown. And,
Mm.
and so she doesn't really like she will kind of like wake up with Motown, but because white gospel and country music aren't resonant for her, she doesn't have any other like soundscapes of her life. They're like, it's like an acrimonious relationship with sound. So I
Hmm.
find that really interesting that that's a case. However, we both meet when it comes to sound bath and sound healing. We both have the same type of tuning that happens whenever we are in a sound bath. And I find that incredibly compelling because it means that there is something that is happening when you're intentional about how you weave in sound that is creating some sort of um, inner attunement, inner alignment, you know. So I find that really interesting. Also, the cultural differences are just mind blowing.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think culturally, and I would say I think a lot of Black folks have some sort of, like, again, we think about, like, I think about very specifically like growing up and like the music that my mom was listening to, and like now that when I hear it, what sort of memories it brings up for me, or where it sort of places me sort of in my childhood, or when I hear other songs out, like, or even when we think about like certain music or songs that we'll hear, and then we'd be like, "Oh, that's cookout music." Like that reminds me of the family
Right.
reunion and connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We assign and prescribe so much meaning to music or kin, and just noticing what would it be like just to sort of be intentional with that. Right? There's a
Mm.
I talk about this in the workbook, but there was a sound back when Clubhouse was a thing during the pandemic. I know everybody was like in Clubhouse trying to make things work virtually and all those kind of things. And there was a group where it was a whole bunch of sound healers. We were just trying to figure it out because it was like, we got to do this virtually? Like, who's a
Yeah, like
sound
how does
technician?
that
We got
work?
to figure that out. And listen, and there was one sound practitioner. I always wish I could remember her name because I always want to credit her for this. But she was one thing that she shared in there that was like really profound. And she says, "Hey, you realize we're always in a sound bath, right? Like if you think about like if you pause and think, you can hear traffic outside, you can hear your fan,
Mm.
you can hear loved ones. Like there's so much happening around us, right?" But then think about how much of that we are actually intentionally trying to control or molding and shaping. And once we put that energy into like shaping it to be the way we want it to be, that's where we can sort of move into a real interesting space of healing or connection around that when we're intentional,
Mm.
right? And think for me, I'm like always intentional. I'm the person, like if I don't check it, I'm the person, I wake up, the news is on, and then I get in the car, I'm listening to something, and then I'm in the gym, then I'm listening to something, then I get home, and so there's instances where we're always sort of plugged in. But what would it look like to pull out the news one time? Like I gotta stay tapped in, but like I ain't gotta watch MSNBC all day, right? To
Mm-hmm.
find some space to bring in some intentional sound, right? Something that'll
Mm.
help soothe and sort of bring that nervous system back into regulation. And so if we sort of take that sort of premise that we're always in a sound bath, how can we intentionally engineer that in a way that is designed to help us heal?
Ooh,
That's
that is a potent question. And I find myself
my
doing that, like if I need to like clean or design, I'm like, wait, hold up, hold, the vibe has to be right. Like I can't just like, like that's a whole thing. And how much are we ambiently bringing in?
in the world around me, the noise around me, how I can let you know construction that's happening out on the street pull me from my center or pull me from my peace, and how do I shift the relationship to that. And sometimes it's just about sitting with like, oh, the vibration of that is actually nice.
Mm.
So I love what you shared. And as someone who's an avid I meditate daily and I teach meditation classes. This is a lot of what I've been thinking about of like, what are we taking in all the time that we are choosing, but also how can we shape or frame our relationship around the things that we didn't choose that are like showing up in our life, but how do I choose response instead of reaction in it?
This is a huge accessible segue to, what we're living with and in as Black queer people, that intersectionality of how are we navigating the environment that we find ourselves in, which feels like a soundscape of microaggressions, sometimes adoration, most times exoticism, a lot of times mammy, the desire to have us mammy folks. And the whole magical Negro thing is just like huge and ubiquitous. Like, I just can't. Like, people don't understand why we have such an issue with like Morgan Freeman. It needs to be a thing. It needs to be called Morgan Freemanism because I think it would be more palatable for people. But like having this like voice of God narration that tells people the way that ushers them through their Shawshank Redemption. Like it's a thing and it keeps showing up again and again and again. And it's a part of our lifescapes that we're living as Black and brown, indigenous and queer folks, I'm wondering how we're able to take that in, like the guy doing the lawn outside while we are, or the dog ringing the bell. One of the things that's really curious about doing this podcast is Augie is oftentimes barking or doing the things, and we've just kind of welcomed it in because we're like, listen, we're not fucking Trevor Noah. Like, we don't have $1 million backing this podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like, the dog's gonna bark. Yet we're calling it in.
Yet,
but like,
Yes.
When
y'all get it, call me, have me back as a guest, okay?
Done.
Come on. Like, but we don't have that, so we're just welcoming it in because that's where we are. But I'm also just wondering, I don't know, how are we working to shift those other things that are happening in our lives? And we can talk a little bit too about like what we see as showing up and what we would like to see shift.
Yeah. There's two words that came up for me as you were sharing that, and then I try to speak off of like, I think about the idea like first thought, best thought. And for me, I think clarity and confidence come up as you shared that. Because I think that, again, it was interesting, our initial conversation about this, and we were like, oh, hold this for the podcast because it felt like a great conversation. As navigating that idea or that like feeling of being like the magical Negro being invited into the space, I think part of that is like being grounded in who you are and what it is that you provide to the world. And the word confidence, and that's the clarity piece, but the confidence piece is knowing when and how to sort of say no and navigate around when you get that feeling. Because I feel like as BIPOC folks, as queer folks, as folks that are often marginalized, that sense of exoticism, that sense of like fetishism, all of those sort of things that sort of come into the work, even if the intention of the folks that are inviting us in is not that, right? That we sort of intuitively have a feeling of like, this is you trying to help me make these white folks feel
reality.
good. Yeah, and like being confident to one, stake a claim in what it is that you do, or being confident in saying no to what that instance and opportunity is. And like for me, I get asked often of like, hey, could you come do a sound bath? Could you come do the sound bath? Could you come share a sound? And I'm like, cool. And I actually talk about more than just the sound. Like I'm not just coming in to like offer a sound bath for 30, 45 minutes and then dipping. But part of what I do is it's the whole self-inquiry piece. It's the conversation around what rest is. It's the exploration of personal power. So I'm not going to extract that one sort of performative piece of what I do. But if you're going to ask me to come in, you're going to get all of me. And so for me, I
Right.
think over the last year or two, I've been a lot more bullish on that to say like, thanks for the experience. This is actually what I offer. Are you interested in that? And for me, that
Yeah.
volleys the decision back into their court to understand what it is that, you know, I offer, we offer, what that looks like, to understand that, yeah, I'm not about to, you can get anybody come and play them bowls for you. But what I'm bringing into the space is something different. And I want to honor that. Yeah.
That part. It gives that image. For me, I have this image of someone like shuffling in, doing a thing,
Not
and then
the
soft
shuffle.
shoeing out. Like it's
Not the shuck and jive.
it's giving vaudeville.
It's the shuck and jive.
Yes, it's giving shuck and drive. It's giving yeah, it feels like, like this is the spiritual way that Black people can perform for people in that same like minstrelsy way. And this like new ooh, that's a question. Are sound baths the new minstrel show?
You know, and let me just pull on that thread a little bit more. Right? Because when I learned sound healing, my teacher Danielle Hall, she runs an organization called Sound Embrace here in Atlanta. That's who I learned from, and she always said sound healing is part performative, part facilitation. Right? And, you know, understanding that like it's an aesthetic on how you set it up, and, you know, you got to create the vibe. That's the performance. But then it's you facilitating the container in the space. And I think part of that is, and I think even more than a practice like yoga, even more than a practice like meditation, and those are both practices I love and teach and have a lot of adoration for. But there is something much more performative about and visual about sound healing, right? Because there's these pretty bowls, and you know what I mean? There's so much, ooh, look at the gong and look at what this setup looks like, that I think if we aren't more intentional about how we hold space with it, it can become that. Right? Because, you know, yoga is just like, let me roll out my mat and let me sort of guide you through this. Meditation, I'm going to come with my cushion. And I say that with no disrespect. I love those practices. But with sound, there is something very visual and performative there that, you know, again, I've seen it in so many different places where it's like, can you come do a sound bath? And I'm like, cool, how long? Can you do a 5-minute sound? No, I'm not coming to do a 5-minute sound bath. What I'm about to do for you for 5 minutes. But they want that visual cue and that look of what it means and what it looks like, right? And so, again, I think if we don't check that performative piece and start to be much more firm with how we want to show up with it as a practice and modality, then, yeah, it's going to become the modern wellness minstrel show, right? So it's going to become
modern wellness minstrel show.
Yeah.
Y'all, that might be the new name of the podcast. Oh my God, this might be the best moment that has ever occurred. The modern wellness minstrel show. Like, because you're still the teacher, and you're still the teacher. You're still the guy. You're still the person holding space. I think when you know that and you step into that, it can't be a minstrel show. It can't be tap dancing and then shuffling out, you know, because you know who you are and what you bring. But I will say that I don't think a lot of people are bringing that energy. And so we need to train folks to realize that.
And I think that's Ashley, a larger... Oh, go ahead, Ashley. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, I wanted to come back to the 2 words that you shared. I know confidence was the second one. What was the first one that you had said?
Clarity.
Mm-hmm. Clarity.
Like knowing who the hell you are. Also, I think we also should do a little bit of labor, I guess, for those who are listening, of defining also, maybe Ashley, you can help us understand like this exoticism and fetishism thing. Like, what can you tell us more about that, you linguist, you?
Who me? I think maybe in a way that is maybe more in the conversation right now that people can connect to this idea is the difference between appreciation and appropriation. Looking at why are you bringing someone into your space, and for what purpose, what service? Are you bringing them in because of the quality of their character, of the being that they are, or is this specifically a thing of like, we need to fill a spot with a Black person right now, or a person of color, or a queer person, or fill in the blank, any historically marginalized group, right? And I know that right now there are many people out there that are trying to do better. And so they are actively looking to diversify their community. But at the end of the day, no one wants to come in and be, I'm not here to be your Black person that makes you feel better, that makes you feel more whole and more complete inside of what it is that is your offering. Especially if I'm coming in and I am the one and it's like, we're finished. We got that. We checked that box now. If you are actively working on changing your environment, on creating a more inclusive environment, and I'm aware that that's what's happening and part of the conversation and part of the shift, cool. So I think that the difference in the or people using us as, what did you say, exoticism, is going back to this like long history of us having been caretakers at some point in time. Like, I don't want to be the house Negro anymore. The house neighbor, as we say, the house neighbor.
The house neighbor.
And
Shawn doesn't know about this use.
Oh, you don't know about this. So my
neighbors.
my sister, growing up when we were in mixed company, would say, neighbors. Look at them, neighbors.
And
So,
I use ninjas. Like
ninjas.
please.
I
and
like
neighbors.
both of those options.
Yeah.
I might have to borrow that, actually. I might have to borrow that.
But we have really loved neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think looking at the way in which you are creating community and the intention behind why you're inviting us into your space. And I think as someone who has been, to use the term, a safe Black person for many people in their life, there was a long period of time, and we've talked about this before, where I would show up with the idea of like, well, it is a privilege for me to be here in this space because I grew up with the narrative, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much. So like, shut up, be here, be present. But then I'm like, but I'm working twice as hard as my counterparts and I'm getting half as much. And I'm bringing a whole bunch to the table and you're all leaning on me now. So what am I doing? Number one, how am I participating in this? So let's come back to the clarity and the confidence, catching up to that piece of it and understanding and recognizing, for those of you that are listening to this and you're like, oh snap, is it me? I'm their magical Negro in this space. It's probably you. It's probably you.
It might be.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Google.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm the magical Negro? Am I the only one? Am I the person that they come to when it's February? What are the things that are, how am I being utilized or not utilized, but how am I being used potentially in this space? I feel like I ventured on a very far away land from where you started my question. Did I answer the question you asked me, Tamika?
Yeah.
I would like to blame perimenopause for not remembering what my question is or was, but I believe that as the sociolinguist, the resident linguist in the room, I will say that this is very typical Black conversation where we just kind of go like this and we don't have linear conversations, which is another cultural difference that comes out of my household. It's like, get to the point. I'm like, We're gonna eventually get there. It might be an hour later.
We're getting there.
No, but I think that what you said is super compelling, especially around like kind of wondering, James Baldwin, famously said, "I am not your Negro," right?
Mm-hmm.
And like talking about that kind of safe friend. I think that this is rife in yoga studios. I think that yoga studios really believe the yoga world, the wellness world in general, really believes that having one person that represents a group is enough to represent a group. Like we're all a monolith. I'm like, if that person is cis, hetero, like if the person is if that person's living a totally different life than I'm living, if like we're all living totally different lives. You know what I mean? Like even with you, Shawn, like we're both Black queer people, but you're a man. So there's still, if we both walk into a room, one room that's going to be higher on the power scale. But if we're in a car and we're driving, we're pulled over, then I'm going to be the person who's more likely to create safety in the situation. Yeah. So it's just like no one's asking about who our partners are in that moment to like figure out if the police officer in that case is also queer. You know what I mean? They're not like there are these other intersectional ways that are constantly creating all these differences. And wellness was like, well, we had Michelle Cassandra Johnson come in, so we're good. I'm like, no, like you're not. I had someone compare me to Tracy Stanley. She was like, well, you and Tracy Stanley are doing the same thing. I'm like, Tracy Stanley lives a completely different life than I do. Like for real, like on a whole different level, like, and I love her. And I love her so much and what she gives. And she's has a different access point than I do. Ashley and I have different access points, like there are just a whole bunch of different things.
I was going to say, I'm going to name something I feel like also complicates or has complicated, I think, the wellness space in a really and I feel like we're still feeling like the ripple effects of that, because I think back to 2020, we think about when George Floyd was murdered. We think about how so many organizations, and we can think about corporate organizations, but in the wellness space, folks were trying to do the same thing of like, how do we amplify voices and how do we do this, right? But we notice like there's always like this little ebb and flow, right? Where it's like, oh shit, something happened. Okay, we need to be really diverse. And then, oh, y'all not talking about it no more. So we can pull back on that. And there's always this sort of like roller coaster. And I think part of that is sort of naming and identifying those sort of things too, right? Because yes, it's great when organizations, studios, are being, I would say nimble to what's happening culturally, socially, and potentially what's happening in their communities. But it's also, for me, I think about, is the work that you're doing sustainable and strategic, right? Having somebody one time, that's one time. But what's the long-term work? Yep.
Listen, I literally can't name, I cannot even cease naming how many studios brought in one person who is in our city. This is Houston, the 4th largest city in the United States with a lot of Black people, okay? Brought in one person to be their magical Negro and their DEI person in yoga studios. And then they were like, okay. And I'm like, well, frankly, that person's a little problematic, number one. And number two, like that person has a totally different lived experience than a lot of people. Like you need to also remember that not only are you choosing one singular moment, you're also choosing one singular perspective. And then that's your moment. And you're going to say work done here. Come on.
We had a 2-hour workshop. We've solved it all. It's like, no.
Right. And we posted the black square, y'all. The black square went up. So
the black square, you can't forget the black square, right?
But I think better recognize our black square.
I think part of that is like the work that we like as folks who are leaders in the wellness space. I think part of that is what the work that, and I keep going back to this idea of clarity and confidence of like being able to push back against that. And even as folks who like educate other folks coming into the space of like, I think for me, when I do like my meditation teacher training or my sound, that's a conversation we have, right? About understanding opportunities that come and like weighing out the benefits and like, okay, cool. This was a nice lick. This was a nice thing. Spotify asked me to come in and do this. Great. But is that a one-time thing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was the pay equitable?
Mm-hmm.
Did it make sense in how you wanted to show up in the work? Or was it a better look for them than it was for you? And that's the question I think we don't always ask around those kind of things. I'm never, and I would say like, when I think about my ability to navigate in the space, I know that there was a lot of instances where space was made for me because of who I am, right? Coming in as a Black queer man, navigating and moving in the space. I can acknowledge that. And at a certain degree, I'm also like, but we're not about to keep having this. We're not about to keep playing that game. So let's talk,
Right.
And I think sometimes we get so excited when an opportunity comes to us that we just like, yes, count me in without asking questions, right? Without, being more intentional with how we're engaging in this. And what's interesting is you mentioned Tracy, Tracy, I did one of her mentorship programs, and it was one of the things that she always said in that of like, noticing what that means and what that dynamic means in terms of what benefit is, right? Like asking questions and being more intentional without just agreeing or, signing a contract without looking it over just because you're excited by who sent it to you. But does this work for you? And does this work for you long term? And then also thinking about, I think, the ripple effects of what that means, for other folks that look like us that are coming into the wellness space or are navigating into the wellness space. And I feel like that also becomes a real interesting dynamic of like, how are we creating conversations? Are we creating space for others in the space as well? So yeah, I feel like they're starting to be, I think, a bigger responsibility for us as we start thinking about how to navigate in that space.
Oof.
Shawn, do
Totally
you feel
agree.
like you came into this work with this awareness, or is this something that has sort of grown in you through your time of facilitating, of your time of educating or offering this? Like, did you have an aha moment of like, snap?
Yeah, I would say probably like C, all of the above, or D, B, whatever, all of the above. I think for me, my previous life was in education and higher ed. And I think that I have navigated similar dynamics working in higher ed and working at different colleges and universities. A lot of my experience, I've worked at HBCUs. So, of course, that's us. But I've worked at other institutions where, they're predominantly white institutions, and sort of noticing what this person in this particular role is supposed to represent. Right. Having those conversations and tensions around the types of programming that we need to be more responsive and culturally relevant to who it is that we serve. And so I would say education sort of primed me for it. And I think as I navigated the wellness space, I'm like, oh, we got to talk. We got to have these conversations here, too. Like, that's just not a thing that happens in colleges and universities as folks are navigating administration and things, but that's actually also happening here on the wellness space. So it almost felt like it was like a peek behind the curtain when I first, because again, I think coming into the wellness space, you're just, I would say for me, I'm like, cool, we all understand this is a space in which we're sort of honoring who we are and how we navigate in the space. And you realize that ain't always the case. And it's like white supremacy and capitalism and all that is baked in everything. And so when having that realization was like, okay, those same tactics or those same ways in which you approached or had to step into spaces or ask more intentional questions or turn things down that were presented in higher ed is sort of that same energy to sort of bring over here, because that organizations or studios looking for tokens, that happens here just like it happens in colleges and universities, right? That magical Negro thing ain't just a wellness thing. That's a thing in, education. And so noticing that, again, it's all baked into the cake. And so those strategies have to be employed here in the wellness space too.
It's baked into the shit cake. Ashley oftentimes talks about the correlations between the yoga world and the acting world. And I'm just thinking about like how much we think, like, I think where this becomes more egregious is that we actually think that the wellness space is going to be different because we're like, people are working towards transcendence. But, and then you'll have people will be like, oh, it's capitalism. Capitalism's doing it. But I'm like, is it? Like, is it just capitalism? Because I feel like it's also like a lot of the problems within the overculture that isn't just about capitalism. Like, capitalism's really great because it's this problem that we can identify and we can say it like it's a thing. And we know, like, unless something major changes, like a dictator becoming president, our like capitalism and our democracy is pretty much going to stay the same. It would take hundreds of years to change that. But white supremacy could change. Like, it could change if our systems changed. But if we keep like putting everything as capitalism, it's like, well, I mean, are we not going to be a free market? Are we saying that the way that our economy works is going to be different? Are we actually going to do all that? Like, who's going to do all that? Like, do we expect the Bolshevik Revolution, in 2025 in the United States? Like, is that really going to happen? Like, are we going to do the China thing? Like, I doubt it. But hear me out. Systems actually have solutions. Like, systemic change actually has one. I don't know. Like, Ashley, you talk about this much more than I do, about these corollaries between like the problematic nature of like being the only one. Yeah. What is coming up for you right now about that?
Well, I think, and part of my question to Shawn and in response to the question that you're asking now is, I grew up mostly not in this country. And then at the times when I was in this country, I was largely in white communities. And so I think for my brain, it's like catching up to things of like, I feel like I'm in the Matrix in that moment when it's like, wait, it's all not real. Like, like I feel like the past, 7-8 years of my life have been this moment of being like, oh, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. And then recognizing that it's like, oh, this, just what you said, this exact same thing that's happening here has happened here. It's happened here. It's happened here. I'm peeling back layers, essentially. And it makes me think also about this idea. What is the saying? The way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And so, as surprising as it was initially when I started making those connections, it's not surprising. It's not surprising at all as we sit with it. And as I think we've probably all spoken about it at some point in time, nothing can change unless the people that are sitting in the place of privilege are willing to be part of the shift and the change, which is very hard to get to happen because these systems have been put in place to serve them. And not many people want to like break down what has been serving them. And so, yeah, I can show up in this moment when a big something happens. When George Floyd is murdered, it's like, this is awful. This is horrible. Oh my gosh, we've got to do something. We've got to change, which I'll speak for myself. It's wonderful and also deeply frustrating to my life that I'm like, this is happening all the time. We have your attention now because we're in a global pandemic and you have nothing to do but sit and watch this. But like, I can rattle off like 10 off the top of my head without even having to think deeply of exact same situations that have happened, and you've done nothing. You might not have even known that they happened. And so I get that we are all motivated to shift, to change when it's a topic that is related to us, but we can't shift and grow and change in a big and real way unless we start looking at it from like the human perspective and not the like, my individual rights are affected. Again, we started someplace, maybe somewhere different.
Girl, where we are is great.
But it also, it makes me think also, I think it's Cleo Wade that said something in her book, Heart Talk, about like, we can't do things the way we've always done them because they're the way we've always done them. And so noticing these patterns, these habitual patterns that we're falling into, even the ones that maybe we see are of service to us, but how can they maybe be of harm to others? And I feel like we can only grow, we can only rise together. We can only tear apart the system if those that have created the system are willing and open to making the shift. To work with us.
They need to work with us. Like, come on now. You've got people like Tracy Stanley, who has gained a lot of access to a lot of these spaces because of her time in Hollywood and just because she's awesome and she's just incredible. Who's like, okay, like I'm here now, you know, I mean, I'm here in this space and I've been here. And how can I bring people into, how can I give access to, and
there are a lot of, I was one name, there are a lot of folks that are doing, and I think that's where, like, when I think about leadership, I think about folks making space for other people, right? Tracy's great. I think about Tracy, I think about Octavia, Rahim. Like, there are so many practitioners out there who are, you know, navigating in the work, have moved into particular spaces, and are now like, I'm going to keep my foot right here. I'm going to say, hey, y'all, let me bring a few more folks in with me. And I think that that's the powerful piece we have to continue to think about, right? Because I think the problematic piece, and I think, Ashley, as you're talking about this idea of like the human experience, is that, and this whole idea of not thinking in the individual, is that I think sometimes folks can get into the individual and like, well, I made it. I'm good. I'm here. Right. Yeah. And want to close the door to be the only one. Right. Like, we're understanding that the only one can be a problematic thing. Not everybody has that view. Yeah. Right. Some people want to be the only one in the room.
Right.
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 And so, you know, noticing that when we get into spin, that's where I always talk about, like, even from a leadership perspective, I just think the sign of a good leader is to replicate more leaders.
That part.
Yeah. And so when I think about leaders in the space, who are those folks that are making room and making space and opening doors, inviting people in? We do have a lot of beautiful folks who are doing that work. And even as I'm navigating the space now, I'm looking, Tracy's kicked open some doors for me and like, hey, I think Shawn would be great for this. Octavia, Dr. Chanti Takarate Perez, like, has done a lot of work opening up those doors. And then now for me, I'm also like, hey, I'm here too. Let me sort of bring some folks in so that, you know, there's more space and opportunity for folks to navigate in this work in a real beautiful way.
Absolutely. We talk about this in our episode on tokenism. We've bought into this, there's only room for one thing, which is really, you know, coming from that whole overseer mentality. It's a vestige of enslaved life, of having one person who rises to the rank of overseer, one person who rises to the rank of house Negro, one person who rises to the rank of masses concubine. And like all of those things, those, you know, we're seeing the vestiges of that in being okay with tokenism, being okay with exoticism, being okay with closing the door and becoming gatekeepers for other people. But we realize that all of those things are miscreations, you know, of what humanity was doing, that there's abundance, there's enough room, there's space for all of us. And frankly, we are so strong when we create and collaborate together. We are so strong when we do that. Nobody Nobody, we buried our own dead for so long. We figured out how to get married by jumping a broom. We can figure these things out when we're in collaboration together. And there's working within the system to dismantle the system, and then there's building a whole new system. Like, I think of it as a ladder, where we have like something that it was in a structure, but then we put something on the side of that and we create something that actually moves people upward, from that pole that was there, that was just like, nope, you try to climb up it, you slide down. Put another structure on the other side of that, add some rungs, and let's all come up.
I also want to
But
name what I want to add to what you're saying too about this idea of like tokenism. What it also does is it sows division amongst ourselves, right? Like, to your point about, we
amen.
think about like collective care, collective healing, community, that whole idea now separates that person or that group. And now it's like, well, look at them, right? You think about how people view folks in that. And it's like, well, they're still part of our community, but that's an intentional way to drive a wedge in to cause issues. And I think there's a lot of work around decentralizing us as we sort of mobilize into communities. And there's tactics like that are like creating those instances where we further divide in ways that sort of keep us out of that sense of power.
That part. And if we look, for those who are, history buffs, look at Haiti and Dominican Republic, and you can see what can happen when people are hell-bent on dividing themselves, even though they're the same people, the same land and all of that. Division will only create harm for everyone involved. But when you can come together and build together, I mean, it's just, I wonder what the island of Hispaniola would look like if, Haitians and Dominicans would come together. And I also, like, how strong would that island be? And I think we oftentimes are just looking at things like, oh, this is Atlanta, this is Houston. We do this. Like, we got the LA Black folks, and we've got the St. Louis Black folks, and the Houston Black folks, and the Atlanta Black folks, and the DC Black folks. And it's like, or like, let's okay, cool. We all have like this culture that we're creating, and like, can we throw it together like gumbo? Because we all know gumbo's delicious. Like, we all eat gumbo.
And it's a whole bunch of beautiful parts together. Yeah.
Yes, it's so much more delicious when it's all together. So what can we do to shift, y'all? What do we do to progress society and the wellness world forward?
Oh, we're doing it here. I think being in conversation around it and not shying away from that. I think, again, coming back to this knowing your worth, clarity, the confidence that Shawn spoke to us. Like, I think about Ashley 15 years ago and walking into certain spaces and being there and being like, should I be here? Is it a little like, okay, just be quiet. Don't mess it up for the next person. And now to walk into a space and to understand that, like, you're lucky to have me. You're lucky to have me. And here's what I bring to the table. And if something hits a chord, to not ignore that or stuff that down, but to like, let's have this conversation right now. And I love what Shawn had said about, put the foot in the door, like, put your foot in the door. Don't let it close. Like, bring others into the conversation, bring others into the space. There is room for all of us. And the tapestry is made richer by, the many different colors in there.
Love it.
I just want to echo, Ashley, what you said. I think about this whole idea of like there being enough for everybody. And I think about I think my favorite leaders in the wellness space. I have literally probably heard them say that, right? Like, we think from the space of abundance, right? And it's that scarcity mindset where it's just enough for me. It's only enough clients for me. It's only enough teaching spots for me. It's only enough fill in the blank for me. that is another one of those, I feel like, symptoms of like white supremacy in those ways that sort of keep us thinking small. And so if we can be in a space where we're thinking from an abundant mindset in that way, then having the courage to invite more folks in is easier to lean into, to have the courage to ask those questions, to ask, hey, is this your typical rate that you pay folks? Like asking those questions when we're in the spaces. Is this a long-term or strategic opportunity for the organization, or is this just a one-time thing? If we start thinking from a much more abundant and, I think, space of collective care, I think we're able to sort of lean into that a little bit more. And I think that while we're talking about a collective conversation, I think if everyone individually leans into that, I think that we're able to make more space, much more spaces that feel, I want to say, like loving, and that feel like actual community in that way. But it's that scarcity mindset that gets to a lot of folks.
Scarcity and lack of community, scarcity and lack of belonging, lack. That sense of community is huge for me. I totally agree with what both of you have said. And I'll add from, just what you said about the work and your creation, Sound is My Sanctuary, giving people a chance to digest what is actually happening in the world, and then to integrate what they're learning, what we are learning about the world, what we are learning about ourselves. I think doing that work consistently can be a methodology to moving forward, progressing us forward, and rest, especially for those of us whose ancestors had less of that, maybe not forever, but at least for a few centuries, integrating rest so that we can actually identify those things and name them and speak to how we are participating in our own harm and participating in our own abundance and bliss and transcendence,
Yeah.
So, man, like this conversation's been rich. Are there any last thoughts from you, Shawn, that you would like to bless us with? Anything that you would like to see or invite the community that listens to us now and in the future? Any other pearls of wisdom you'd like to drop?
Yeah, I think as you were sharing, there was something that came up for me that I think, especially as we're sort of navigating the wellness space, the mindful space, the spiritual space, however we want to label it, that I think the hallmark of a lot of folks leaning into spiritual practices or mindfulness practices are creating much more intentional ways for them to connect with themselves. And I think when we think about this idea of selfishness versus community, I think the selfish piece is that once we get to this space of self-actualization, that we keep that to ourselves and for ourselves. And I think that as we're thinking long-term and bigger picture, if we can do our own work, then that makes us much better suited and much better oriented to be of help and assistance in community. And so if we keep that idea that like my enlightenment is not just for me to get ahead, but my enlightenment is for me to turn around and now be that much more of a stronger presence in community, I think that we'll all be in a much better, much stronger space.
Ugh, juicy. Mm-hmm. Where all can people continue to learn about you, listen to you, follow you, become a lover, a fan of you, or a lover?
I am single at the moment.
Now also seeking lovers.
Applications up on the site.
Actually, always
you can find that application at ShawnJMoore.com.
Hit me up in the DMs.
But no, my website is the best place to find me. You can find any of the other links there. Instagram, Shawn J _Moore. But my website is a great space. You can connect to any of my resources, including the Sound of My Sanctuary book. You can learn more about the classes. I do a lot of work virtually. And so if folks are looking for community and might not have it in the areas in which they're in, I do a lot of virtual offerings and workshops as well. And then from there, you can also find like where you can find my meditations and practice. I got stuff on YouTube, practices on Insight Timer and Muse and Meditation Studio, and a few other platforms, both traditional guided meditation, yoga nidra practices, and also sound bath practices as well.
So we're going to put all of that into the show notes. I have one last question for me. This is a light question, but also it's something that I'm currently like really digging into. Why do you carry forward with you Shawn J. Moore instead of just Shawn Moore?
Good question. You want to know, it's actually a real simple reason. When I was making my website domain, Shawn Moore was taken. That's literally what it was. Shawn Moore was taken. So I was like, Shawn J. Moore? Okay, great. It's there. So from there, I just sort of ran with it as like, let me just keep that as a way to sort of set myself apart. But website
it's
domain.
A brand. It's a whole brand.
I've leaned into it.
I was
I'm
actually
expecting.
I was expecting something like super deep. You're like, nah, access.
No, I'll be completely honest. It was the domain name that was available. And I was like, let's just keep it going and keeping it running.
Because Ashley's email is also Ashley Nicole Rideau. And I'm like, okay, like, should I throw my Renee up in there? I have too many names already.
Poor people typing out all that when they write to me, but it's the same story. I was like, who are these other A.N. Rideaus in the world? Where are you? Yeah.
They're all in Louisiana.
They're all in Louisiana.
Thank you again so much. We deeply appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been...
My heart feels warm.
Yeah, same. I'm like, this has been such a great conversation. Like, I think in the work we do, I think we're all very tapped into our nervous system. And I think that like being in conversation with you both, I've just felt so much at ease. And so I'm just like thankful to being able to share space with y'all. This has been like a real heart-feeling sort of conversation. So thank you.
Same. Thank you so much, you all, for listening. Let us know what you thought. We love you so hard. We'll catch you next time.